I have a little different take and approach in terms of my comments tonight because in getting ready for this meeting, I spent a lot of time reflecting over the weekend as how did we get to this point in time? We've been at this process now for 3.5 years. 3.5 years. And that flies in the face of a lot of comments I've been sitting here and listening to from the audience about how we've knee-jerked reaction in some of these conclusions and how we haven't thought through them and how we haven't performed due diligence. So I'm going to take a few minutes and try to summarize the 3.5 years worth of work, hopefully in about 5 minutes. And I want to make sure, Dawn, I'll give this to you to put in the record because it's really important to have it in the record so that this new board that comes in December will have this in front of them as the record, the facts of how we got here, because I think it's really important. Okay. Now, my first full month on the school board was January of 2016. So I came on the board, and at that time, the board had nothing on our agenda for any major changes in the buildings, any of the buildings, Franklin Regional buildings. We had nothing on the agenda. Then major unexpected equipment failures occurred. They were unplanned. And if anybody would deny that, I have them here. In January of 2016, we had a boiler failure in the high school. Okay, and we have 3 boilers in the high school. One was already down. This one went down. So we were operating on a very thin line, potentially closing the high school for several days if we had another boiler problem. So that was problem number 1 in January. Then we had 2 failed HVAC compressors. Each of these are fairly expensive and time-consuming to repair on the fly. And then shortly after that, we had 2 failed chiller compressors. So at that point in time, I would venture a guess that every person in this room, every homeowner, would do the same thing that the board did next, question the quality of the infrastructure of all the Franklin Regional buildings. That's just a natural reaction. So we did a quick study back then, and the facts weren't encouraging. We had a large number of major equipment items in all our buildings and systems that were at or beyond their serviceable life. I'm talking about boilers, pumps, hot water heaters, pumps, chillers, roofs, HVAC systems, electrical systems, on and on and on. So there was the board in the early months of 2016, realizing that we could experience more such of these failures, unplanned, which could cause the school to potentially shut down for days. That precipitated discussion among the board about what's our long-range infrastructure and facility plan. Unfortunately, surprising, we didn't have a 15 to 20-year plan then. And many of you probably have this experience with your organizations. My professional experience back then with both public and private organizations that if you plan to be around for the next 50 years, you probably ought to have at least a 15 to 20-year plan in your hip pocket as to how you're going to sustain your facilities for the long haul. Now, Franklin Regional, I expect, hopes to be around for the next 50 years. I'm sure all the teachers in the audience would agree with that. That's your job security. So there we were, faced with this situation. We had 2 elementary buildings, 70 to 90 years old, and no renovations of any of those buildings over the last 20 years. So we obviously needed a long-range plan. I mean, that's not rocket science. We needed a long-range facility plan. Now, the board back then, there are 6 members that are on this board sitting here now, and 3 others that have since left the board, decided we need to work on getting a better handle on our infrastructure, i.e. our unknowns and liabilities. So in March in 2016, this is more than 3 years ago, we set out to obtain an independent engineering-based study of the overall conditions of the infrastructure of the Franklin Regional buildings and move forward from there. That's 3 years ago. Okay, I've been accused through this whole process of lying about some of these statements. In fact, I was accused by a member of the audience that's here tonight of having lied that we had the Sloan Building project planned all along, and that the studies performed in 2017 and 18, which I'm going to talk about in a second, were just for show. And I've since heard many critics say that in the newspapers, say the same, but the facts bear out quite the opposite, as you will see. Okay, this is the facility plan that we started with. Clean sheet of paper, nothing on it. We had no preconceived notion. It's a blank sheet. So we set as a board a task of how to convert this single sheet of paper into something that we could think about in terms of moving forward the district in getting a handle on our facilities and our infrastructure. Here's how we went about it. In September of 2016, we had a town hall meeting to discuss setting up the contract for this conditions analysis study. And unlike some people have said, this is not like the conditions analysis study that Penn Hills did, where all they did was a feasibility to see if they could build a high school. We did an honest-to-goodness conditions analysis study by an independent engineering firm to look at the conditions of all of our buildings. We had about 100 folks, wish we had more, but attended in the middle school auditorium, and we took down all the inputs. January 2017, fast forward, 4 months later, we had a second town hall meeting. People who say we weren't transparent and we weren't getting input from the public, take note. So we had a second town hall meeting to discuss the results of the conditions analysis study, again in the middle school auditorium. We had again 100 plus folks attend. And for people who say it was a useless piece of document, this is the conditions analysis. Extremely thorough analysis of the 5 buildings and the athletic facilities. Now, none of the board members, myself included, liked the results of that study. We didn't like it, but we had to deal with the facts. And what the study said is if we do nothing with Heritage and Newlandsburg, if we do nothing, just to make those buildings livable for the next 10 years, over the next 10 years, we'd have to spend $32 million to fix the aging infrastructure of actually including Sloan Elementary too over the next 10 years. Again, none of us liked that, but those were the facts and we had to deal with it. And I note at that point in time there was no cartoons or any description of what the Sloan Project would look like. This was a true due diligence effort. Now, I'm going to throw one other thing in here, like most districts do, because I've heard an awful lot of folks, and you heard some tonight talk about population growth, and that we use the population growth as a factor into this whole decision as to whether or not to move forward. But like most districts do when they enter into these kinds of building projects, we contracted with a prominent demographer to perform a demographic study of our community to make sure, the board wanted to make sure that we were aware of the short-term and long-term population trends and that we did not miss anything. Okay, and here's the study. It's on the website. Everybody can go look at it if you'd like. The study showed some minimal population growth would be occurring about 6% by 2025. Okay, now if you're building a new building, the state requires you to have enough space in the building to accommodate potentially 10% more students by state law. That's what we're required to do. So we felt comfortable saying, okay, state requires 10%, demographers saying we could expect 6%, so we're in the same ballpark. We weren't going to overbuild, we weren't going to underbuild. We wanted to make sure we were safe. So contrary to what the opponents claimed, demographics was not a factor one way or the other for the Sloan Project. It was not a factor. It was just an insurance policy. We wanted to make sure that we didn't miss anything. So now the board, after having that information, the feasibility study and the demographic study, we started to scope out and evaluate the options. Now we're in March 2017, 2 years ago still, okay? We had another town hall meeting discussing the top 3 options. So we were very transparent, invited everybody to the community, in the community. It was advertised in the paper. And we had fairly good attendance, 100 or so people. This was up in the high school cafeteria. We wrote down all the questions, 200 plus questions that we received. And we wrote them all down, and we developed the answers to all the 200 questions and issued the answers publicly. It's on the website. Okay, so this board wanted to make sure that whatever we were working on our design options, we factored in the input from the community. So nobody can say that we did not get input from the community. If you didn't show up at that meeting, I'm sorry, but we had input from the community. Most of those 200 questions we had considered and factored in. There were some that we had not factored in and considered, and so we did factor that into the final designs. So that was March of 2017. April 2017, we had another town hall meeting, again, fourth town hall meeting, to discuss the options that we had put forth. We had a series of options, and the board was recommending, or we were considering recommending a specific option, and the feedback we had from the community was actually fairly unanimous that we would proceed in a direction of the Sloan Project. So then, in April 2017, we began the designs of the buildings. We had not begun to design at that point. We had a concept of a Sloan 3 to 5 and a renovated K to 2. The architect engineer designed the exterior of the building, obviously, but guess who designed the interior of the building, the Sloan 3 to 5 the 3 to 5 building and the K to 2 building? Teachers designed the interior of the building so that it would be optimally designed from an educational standpoint. Now I want to point out, in the middle of all this, we had some new board members elected, as does occur. And those board members, and they're here on the board, they started out appropriately skeptical. I would too. If I came on the board new and hadn't been through the details, they were skeptical. So I spent time, other board members spent time reviewing what I've just described to you in a lot of detail. And as it turns out, they were, up until tonight, at least one of them is still, but up until tonight, they were supportive after reviewing all the facts. So what are the main objections these days? First is the cost. Everybody seems to be hung up on the cost. Nothing is free, so there is going to be some cost. And what people fail to recognize or deal with is that if we do nothing, we're going to spend $32 million anyway on the existing 3 buildings. Another issue is, okay, we like the building, but build it on the main campus. And we consider that option too, but as you heard tonight, there's clear issues with congestion on the main campus as is, and that would be difficult. And another option, another complaint we heard is buy some land elsewhere and build it there. And we thought about that one too, but that increases the cost even more because we own the land at Sloan, whereas we'd have to go buy it elsewhere. Unfortunately, many of the statements that have been reported, letters to the editor, statements from citizens complaining have been factually incorrect, they're disinformation, or improperly characterized. And I'm okay with everybody having their opinion, but not everybody's entitled to their own set of facts. Okay, so what's the punchline out of all this? The punchline in 200 words or less for what we are doing here tonight is, my opinion, everyone needs to see through all the false and misleading statements and understand the real big picture. The facts are, our elementary school buildings are educationally antiquated, and the infrastructure of these buildings is failing. And unfortunately, the opponents are not telling the community that their opposition to the Sloan Project would require an expenditure of $32 million anyway in taxpayer funds just to make the 70 to 90-year-old elementary buildings livable for the next 10 years. That plan would only fix it, not upgrade, for $32 million. So what would the community get from that plan? Well, the 70 to the 90-year-old buildings would become 80 to 100-year buildings. The taxpayers would get a corresponding increase in taxes with no benefits for the kids. By comparison, I believe the school board's plan would result in significant educational, safety, and security improvements for the students, Franklin Regional Elementary School students. Here's my bottom line and why I plan to vote yes for this. A vibrant and high-quality school district is a major factor in attracting new residents and, parentheses, new taxpayers to the community, and is critical to maintaining and increasing the value of everyone's home and property. Trying to get by with the antiquated elementary school buildings is not a recipe for the long-term success of any community. We currently have 3,300 students in the school district, and we need to do the right thing for them. Further, we also need to do the right thing for the many thousands of children that will attend this district in the future over the next 50 years, since we plan to be in business in this district for at least 50 years. So I plan to vote yes without any reservation, and I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know you all have busy lives, lots of kids at home. I thank you for attending and making your comments known. Thank you.